Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a DADCAW. It is the 26th of January, 2021. It is Tuesday, and it is 7:37. I think the last DADCAW, or one of the most recent DADCAWs, we also had a 37 as the end of the day, and the reason why that's significant is because Error 37 was Diablo 3, so there's a little bit of an anecdote. Mesk would not be happy if I let the opportunity to reference Diablo 3's server crash on launch. If I didn't take that opportunity and grip it by the balls. So we've done that. And the title of this DADCAW, 119 rounds, 5 hours. That is a statistic from the final series that I casted alongside Squid in the European Development Championship Wildcard Qualifier for Season 2 of the main tournament. And we had a series that went to 3 maps between Lil Mix and Tickatacken, which Lil Mix eventually took. Probably the easiest game of their life because map 1 was 3 overtimes. Map 2 was 16-13, so very, very narrow difference. 1 round away from going all of the rounds of regulation. And then map 3 was double overtime. And they traded their opponent's map pick. So they won their opponent's map pick in triple overtime, and then they lost their own map pick. So yeah, quite the series. They then went on to show that they are super good by losing in the next stage. I think 2-0. Well, 0-2, I guess, for them. And then getting 16-0'd by some other team. So I can't even say it was necessarily worth the time investment that it took to cast their game in that sense. Though I'm sure they did try very hard. So yeah, at least their team logo was the face of a monkey. So there's a little bit of simulation to be thrown in there. Unfortunately, I don't think any of their player names were particularly memorable. Whereas at least for like Astralis talent, we had a guy named Void. That was fucking hilarious. So why am I making a vlog, a DADCAW, where that's the title? Well, for one, it's just to say that where have I been for a while? I haven't uploaded to this channel in a little bit. The reason being, I've actually been hard at work on some Broodwork content behind the scenes. I've been recording some developer sessions of that. None of those are public. None of those are even on the internet yet, just on my hard drive. But another thing that I've been doing is casting Counter-Strike. So the beginning of this month, maybe towards the end of December, I reached out to a couple of people on over Twitter that were in the CSGO casting space, and we just got to work sort of practicing. Obviously, I've never casted Counter-Strike before. I thought about doing it. I thought maybe I could do it. I never really took it too seriously. And then within, I think, 2 weeks of casting, just doing very, very basic practice casts, we were able to put together a sort of casting demo, if you will, where we just casted one game. And we sent it off, and we said, here's an example of our casting. And then they were, the EDC, the European Development Championship, hired us for the qualifiers. They had previously worked with my partner Squid, my duocaster, and he was able to sort of get us in the door with, in terms of negotiations, right? That was obviously its own very surprising turn of events for me. I was very, very impressed that we were able to do that, because that level of competition, by the way, I sort of memed on it by saying that it was the easiest game of that team's life, and they went to like 5 overtimes across 3 maps and traded map picks and stuff. That's still a much higher level of competition than you expect to start casting, at least if you're being paid for it. And most of the time, you don't expect your first event to, I mean, you probably should expect it to be paid in some way, some sort of compensation. You don't normally expect it to be compensated to the same degree. I was compensated, I would say, with quite a fair rate in terms of what you would expect for maybe tier 2 casting, maybe even tier 2.5, something like that. So to start off there, for one, it shows that there's a level of trust in the organizer of my partner Squid, Jamie, his ability to pick out talent and then field it. Like, they've worked with him before, so they have a little bit of trust there. I guess it also shows that I'm good enough at picking up some of these things. It's a role that I didn't think too much about, and it's had a lot of downstream effects, me learning how to cast properly, how to have camera presence better, and all of these other things that go into structuring a good CSGO cast and being a good CSGO caster. A lot of that stuff is, there are things that I would allow to fall by the wayside. Maybe I was tangentially aware of some of the circumstances, some of the skills that would be really useful in the casting space that I would absolutely need to master if I wanted to get my first gig be paid and at such a high level of Counter-Strike relative to what most people start out with. And maybe I was sort of aware of some of the other elements that would go into it, and maybe some of my own personal advantages coming into it. Like, I've got pretty decent word choice, and I try to think about really abstract concepts and then distill them into more understandable bits. And that's something that I've been doing on this channel for a very long time with my DADCAW series, with my Crow Pill series, that obviously I haven't done too much work on recently, but that's like another example of the same thing. And in general, when I'm trying to explain things for the layman, I usually am able to get them up to speed so that they can come along with the rest of the conversation at that point. So if it's in the middle of a mod stream or something of that nature. And usually it doesn't take too long for me to be able to explain that successfully. So yeah, there's a lot of skills that maybe I was already setting myself up well for. But because I hadn't fully remembered, like right now I'm looking directly into the camera while speaking, and I just wasn't comfortable doing that previously. It's super natural for me now because I can't imagine not doing that. I can't imagine looking down or at my other monitor or something while I'm meant to be addressing somebody. And this is something that I've been doing a lot more just because I've been on a couple of camera segments before or between games during those casts. Now, granted, I've only casted one event, 3 days, 6 best of 3s. It's not that much whatsoever, even though it was a 5-hour cast for 119 rounds of Counter-Strike towards the end to finish things off on day 3. That was certainly very insane. But it's not a lot of CS in the grand scheme of things. Maybe that's not even the longest day that I'll ever work, right? Or the longest single series I'll ever cast, I should say, because the whole day was 2 best of 3s, obviously, so it was like 8 hours or something. Maybe that's not even the longest day I'll work. You know, there's the legendary 14-hour days that talent used to have to work back in, even at the tier 1 level back a couple of years ago. And then even in 2020, when we had the coronavirus lockdowns, there's a bunch of talent in tier 1 that were dealing with the same thing, basically, having to endure the similar conditions to what they had. It was a regression in terms of industry standard. And maybe I'll live through some of that, or maybe I'll have to eat that sort of less exciting plate in order to eventually get to the point where I can get the silver platter. Time will tell in that respect, I suppose. And I'm mostly deferring to Jamie Squid, my duo partner, who's obviously had a lot more experience in that department. And of course, I try to like wrap my head around a lot of the same dealings, and when he makes a decision, I usually ask him to sort of explain why, just so that, not because I'm trying to contest him necessarily, just because I'm interested in his motivation and what he thinks is the reason for that, so that I can learn myself, so that if something happens where maybe I get an opportunity that's not necessarily directly related to him, or if just in the future, these are skills that I need to learn, right? So one of the things that I noticed in general is that not only am I looking into this camera a lot more often, but I'm also structuring my sentences a lot better, and throwing is a lot more obvious. So when I'm throwing to somebody else in a talk show, for example, any of the stuff that I've been doing recently on my other channel, the Semi-Pro-Nego channel, we recently had an Elo Heaven episode that was recorded in the middle of my casting stuff during EDC. It was streamed during that. So it was like the day 2 of my casting stuff. I did that episode with them, with Dinko and Vu. And my throws were a lot more obvious in conversation. And I think this is something that, on a passive level, is always going to be there now. Because once you've started to really work this skill into your parlance, that's just going to be the way that it is all the time. So, for example, I might be able to just send something off. Like, I'll make a statement, and the way that I just tone and I guess, inflect at the end of the sentence makes it very clear that I've finished my thought and now I'm leaving space for somebody else to come in. And especially useful in an environment where people are just more interested in that sort of thing. People have already done a bunch of talk shows. They've got their own reps. They've sort of been through the similar trial by fire in a way. They've already done a lot of the same practice that you have. So in those environments where you're dealing with people who have been on analysis desks or in casting booths or on talk shows for a while, they will also know when they can interject, when they can come in. And that's how you establish a really good flow. So if you are interested in this in action in a longer form series, I would recommend going into that Elo Heaven episode number 6 with Dinko, because it's a really solid example of this exact thing where I'm able to just make a statement and I don't have to tag it with like, so what do you think about this, guest or host or whoever you are? Like, I don't need to necessarily do that. Now, if I'm asking a pointed question and I want somebody specific to open up the conversation on, then yes, I will address them by name, obviously. But a lot of the times in my previous work, if I had to throw to a general answer where anybody could come in and say something, was a lot harder for me to be able to do that successfully without there being that awkward, like 2 second sense of like, people don't necessarily know if I'm fully done speaking, if that was the last sentence to come out of my mouth before they can start speaking. I'm just getting a lot better at that. And that's not always going to be the like super noticeable anyway. If you get a talk show guest or something like that, that's, just not as used to those mechanics of speaking. But I think that commentary in a way is the same thing as having a conversation. It's just like obviously ramped up. There's a lot of professionalism involved. There's a lot of basic mechanics that you have to be very on point. The stakes are certainly higher. The conversation cannot veer into certain directions, cannot feature certain words, and cannot have too much to do with things other than what the commentary is supposed to be about. Whereas in theory, a conversation can go anywhere. And that's why I guess I would liken it more to a talk show in that sense. But I like the idea, I like the metaphor of using a conversation and comparing that to a casting session. Because if you're doing a game cast on CS, for example, Counter-Strike, which is what I've been doing, then what you'll notice is when you sit down to have a regular conversation, for one, it's so much easier than casting. Like the stakes are much lower, as I said, but a lot of the same rules are applying. So at some point you throw to the other person and they can come in and start talking. And then at some point they're supposed to throw to you, or they leave space for you to interject. Maybe they take a bit of a micro pause because they have to take a breath. And if you want to come in at that position, depending on how comfortable you are with each other, maybe you can say, yeah, you're right, and this makes me think of that, or I'm just going to follow up on something that you just said, and you can reference something that they mentioned, and all of these different elements come into play. And when you really deconstruct it, it sounds almost absurd. It feels like it's ridiculous to do that about something as mundane as a normal conversation that you're having with your friends, but I can find a lot of parallels in thinking about normal conversations, the same way that I can find parallels to that with regular casting. And another thing that you may have noticed in general is that there's a bit more fluidity to content like this, to content like that Elo Heaven episode, where even if I flub something where I have picked the wrong word for the situation, or even if I've actually mispronounced something or made a mistake, a lot of the times I just keep talking instead of having to stop and correct myself. If you go back and listen to a lot of the other videos that I've done, like these DADCAWs, for example, you might find general statements that I make that feel a lot less polished, a lot less fluid, because maybe I picked the wrong word. I almost said ficked instead of picked right there as an example. And I'm slowing things down and deconstructing it because that's convenient for this particular case. Normally, I wouldn't comment on the fact that I just said before saying picked. And in such a situation, if you wind the clock back a month or a couple weeks or whatever to one of those other DADCAWs, then you might see me say, oh, obviously I meant this word, or, I actually meant to say this instead of that. And that breaks the flow of the entire statement. The fluidity is gone. The flow is gone. So that's something that I've picked up and integrated into the rest of the way that I speak as well, the manners in which that I'm speaking, because it's so much better for actually communicating. And this is something that, now that I'm thinking about it in this context, I think it's really easy to see how you can improve in something that doesn't seem to have that much related. Like, obviously, when you sit down and think about it, sitting down and talking about a video or in the context of a video is very similar to sitting down and casting, or standing up in my case, and casting. You're using a lot of the same things. Like, of course, you want to have camera presence. You want to be able to actually articulate your thoughts. You want to be able to focus. You want to be able to be cogent as well. Like, you also kind of want to mince your words and don't go off into too many tangents, because otherwise it would be a little bit harder to understand the main point or the main argument or whatever you're trying to communicate. So you want to make sure that you're understandable, that you're fluid, that things are moving along at a reasonable pace, and that people can in general enjoy the content in that way. Otherwise it becomes a little bit jagged. It becomes a little bit like maybe the rough edges need to be sanded off in that sense. There's still more polish for you to do in terms of how you just deliver your ideas. And this DADCAW so far has been so much more fluid in general than even some of the more recent ones that I have done, like even some of the shorter ones that I have done. I think one of the best ones that I've done recently, in terms of the mechanistics aspect of casting or commentating or just speaking publicly in a forward-facing manner, is obviously going to be the Last Call for Brood War one. That one was pretty solid because I came in with a plan and I knew what I was going to say. And even then, there was a decent amount of stumbles. There have been some stumbles here as well, but some of them have been for effect. Some of them have just been recovered a lot easier as well. And that's another thing that you learn about casting, by the way, is sometimes you will screw something up and you need to just throw away whatever you're talking about. Maybe I make a point and then I realize it's a really dead end point. It's not even a really interesting point. I've just grabbed onto it because I wasn't fully prepared to talk at that moment and I had to grab something. And I want to just get away from that point as fast as possible. So I want to discard it immediately. So that happens less when you prepare a little bit. And that's exactly what I had done in that context. I had prepared for the subject at hand in that video. And so those kinds of statements didn't end up needing to be recovered from. But even then, I was able to level up my recovery game, for example, in this episode, a lot more than in some of the previous episodes, just by virtue of me being able to handle that sort of thing a little bit better because I've done the casting, I've done the prep, I've done the practice, I've put my reps in, and I've realized that this is a skill that is really, paying dividends in the middle of a broadcast. So surely when the stakes are less high, they're lowered, I'll be able to handle that a lot better. So that's just one example of the many other examples I've given throughout in this video, and also of the many examples that I have not recounted specifically of where you can learn a new skill. And in some degrees, I'm not going to say that I've mastered it by any means, but you can learn it and try to practice it to a high level of some level of mastery, a high level of efficiency, of quality. And you can deliver a better product in that context. And then you can come back and apply a lot of those lessons. Maybe some of these will be subconsciously applied, as I'm sure many of these are. Like, I didn't even think about looking at the camera, really, until I realized I was already doing it. I absolutely had no thought of like, oh yeah, I got to remember to look in the camera, because it's just already sort of burned into my brain in that same way. So a lot of these are going to be subconscious. Some of them are going to be a little bit more conscious. Maybe you make some mistakes, or you don't use certain tactics that you found useful in the other context, like in the broadcast. And then you come back and you're like, oh, I've noticed that this is actually missing from this video and I should do that more often. But I have a feeling that learning about casting and all that stuff, practicing casting, becoming somewhat decent at casting, and trying to level up the casting even after the fact, it's going to be a lot better in terms of how it applies to some of the other things. The downstream effects of learning how to cast are going to be great for my general conversation making, for my video making, and for my streaming, I think, for off-the-cuff statements. All of those things are just going to improve. And it goes to show you, sometimes you step out of your comfort zone and you learn a skill that doesn't seem to have too much application outside of that one skill, even if there's some connections in terms of how you conceptualize, like speaking publicly and all that stuff. And even though you can think, maybe I could be good at this, but it's going to take a lot of work, sometimes you win out in that aspect as well, and you're able to parlay that into other things. So in terms of a bit of more of a progress update style video, which obviously I haven't used DADCAW for in a little while because I've just been super busy, I will say that related to the casting stuff, that will continue to happen. And aside from that, I wanted to name drop the fact that, of course, I have been casting with Squid. He's my duo partner now. Looks like we're going to be continuing to do additional development in that respect. As far as the StarCraft content goes, there will be more of that. There will be some streams coming up as well, where I work on some content. And I guess aside from that, you can just expect more content on the second channel. I will probably be getting into more esports related analysis in addition to the talk shows that I've been doing. I'm not 100% sure how to balance the kind of content that I've been making, because I've been making talk show content, I've been making map content, custom CSGO map content, that sort of stuff. And I've also started to think about making esports analysis based content, like analyzing a round from a game or something like that, analyzing concepts or whatever. And it's challenging for me to come up with a reason to put all of that content on the same channel. Beyond, I really don't want to make another channel. Like, I definitely don't want to do that. So I am thinking a little bit about that. I'll probably just for the short term start putting that content on in the same position. But people keep telling me it's difficult to handle channel growth or whatever when you're constantly uploading different kinds of content. So maybe people will just have to get used to seeing a bunch of different kinds of content in their subfeed, I suppose. At least I have delineated it across the lines of CSGO and esports related content and game dev and Brood War related content. So at least there's that. As far as the Fear 2 playthrough, that has, of course, also been there. I did want to mention as well that I just haven't forced myself to sit down and play that, or stand up and play that in my case, because it is a really boring game. I assume we're probably only 1 or 2 more streams away from actually finishing, and I'm not really looking forward to actually reviewing that piece of shit, but I guess it'll be a short review in that sense, so I can look forward to that. I can also leverage some of my broadcast talent sort of skills and my newfound skill set in that regard, I can leverage that to make the review even better in terms of how I communicate the ideas. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And I guess aside from that, it's just about more Brood War content. I did think that I'd be able to release a Nemesis mission that I've been working on by the end of this month, but it looks like because of the casting stuff, especially taking up a huge amount of my time, I wasn't able to balance the rest of it to make sure that I was still good for that kind of content to be developed to an acceptable state of quality for me to release it publicly. So there will be some play tests for that stuff. I don't know how public those will be, and I don't know when those will be, but hopefully before the end of February we'll be done with that. And I did also want to announce that I will indeed be doing some work on the new engine in February, maybe even sooner than that. Although there's not much left in the month of January, obviously, which is absolutely crazy. I can't believe we're already almost 1/12 of the way through 2021. Time really does fly in this pandemic lockdown world. So I hope you've been staying healthy and sane, and I hope you've had a grand old start to this year. It's already looking like a better year than the previous, despite some of the political insanity that happened early, which I've thankfully been able to mostly tune out. Hope you have as well. It is a mind virus after all, and there's enough viruses in the world. I will leave us with a sort of notion that once again there will be additional content uploaded to this channel. Of course, some more DADCAWs in the future, some more reviews in the future once Fear 2 is actually finished, more mod streams, and obviously Fear 2 itself as a game stream being done, and probably get back to those Hydra AI castovers as well, since we've been able to resolve some issues with those. Some very exciting stuff in the works. Don't want to bog down this video too much with additional updates. And I will leave it at that. So thanks for hanging out, and thanks for liking, because I know you already did. Everybody always likes the video before they even watch it. That's how YouTube works. And I am actually interested in what kinds of content you'd like to see after the currently announced Let's Plays are done. So if you have some suggestions for those, feel free to comment them. Right now I'm thinking that after Fear 2, I'll be doing Genesis Rising, which is a space RTS. It's actually probably pretty terrible. But I played it a long time ago, so I just figured out of curiosity, morbidly mostly, I will go and play that. But also, I wanted to play Age of Empires after that, so if that sounds interesting to you, let me know. Bye-bye.